guys, hi, how's it going? How y'all doing today? Hopefully today finds you well. Today I am doing my next review video in my palette roulette series, in which I review a palette that I have in my collection that might also be in your collection. I tell you about the good, the bad, the ugly, all the things about the palette. I show you some eye looks I was able to create via pictures. I show you some swatches of the palette, and then we pull a new palette. We do it all over again. These are not necessarily the brightest, newest palette on the market. I like to get use out of the products that I have and get more familiar with the palettes that I own. So that is what this review series started out as. I cannot come to you and review the palettes until I have used every single shade at least twice in an eye look. As an arbitrary goal for myself is to use them at least twice, but ultimately I've used every single shade multiple times. I've used these palettes with primer, without primer, with glitter glue, without glitter glue, all the things, so that I'm able to come to you with a more informed review of what the palette, how the palette is, and really just give you my thoughts and opinions on those palettes. Today, we're going to be going over an indie brand and a mainstream brand, one that is a brand new palette and one that is a relatively old palette and a bestseller. So we'll be going over the Unearthly Lore palette, which is a bestseller for Unearthly, and it's been around for quite some time actually. And then we'll also be going over the Too Faced APPLEY in Love, which is a newer palette for a mainstream brand. And honestly, one of the first times that I have side-eyed a Too Faced palette in a very, very long time. So I hope that sounds like something you're interested in. If it does, please keep on watching. For those of you new here, hi, my name is Donna. I'm a lover of all things high and colorful beauty and self-care. And ultimately, this is my self-care. I love coming out here, talking to you guys about the good, the bad, the ugly, all things beauty coming into my life, all things beauty going out of my life. I do reviews and get ready with me's and project pans and really just talk a lot about makeup because that is what I enjoy and it soothes my soul. And I hope that this channel brings you as much solace to your soul as it does me, and that you'll want to subscribe before you go. And if you do, please let me know down in the comment section because I would love to welcome you personally. And with that said, let's roll into this review of these two palettes because I do feel like I have a lot to share. We're going to start with the Too Faced APPLEY in Love palette because it is the mainstream palette. It is more easily accessibly gotten by you. Easily accessibly gotten. Is that even a phrase that makes any sense? It's more easily accessible to the public, right? Not a lot of people, unless you're into indie makeup or unless you're in the makeup space, know a lot about Unearthly, but almost everybody knows about Too Faced. So let's start here. So this is the Too Faced APPLEY in Love palette. This is in their tin packaging with a magnetic clasp. And it is $54. It has 0.54 ounces of product in it, or 0.03 ounces per pan, because there are 18 shades of shadow in here. This is a limited edition palette. It is from a cruelty-free brand always, and it is inspired by apples. The packaging is metal, but these apples are raised. Their tin packaging is some of the favorites of the community. It does say just Too Faced across the top here. It doesn't say anything else on the front, but on the back it does say APPLEY in Love, and it does have some information about the palette there and the company, the shelf life, all the things. And this does have looks like a 12-month shelf life for the product. It is called an eyeshadow palette, which means even though this is a cruelty-free brand, none of these are not eye safe, so that tells me that it's not a vegan palette. If that makes you feel some sort of way, this might not be the palette for you. Additionally, this palette smells like caramel apples. I will say that it is a very subtle caramel and apple scent in my humble opinion. I would say that this isn't even as strong a scent as the peach palette was with peaches. It just smells kind of sweet with a little bit of a caramel apple kick to it, to be honest. It does have 5 stars on the Too Faced website, but there are only 5 reviews to make up that 5 stars. On Ulta, it does have 4.7 stars, and there are 34 reviews on that. One of those reviews that was a 1 star said that she was giving it a 1 star because it smelled so bad. I don't think there's I don't really think there's anything wrong with the smell of this. It's not like it smells like roses or poop. It has a really sweet smell to it, but it honestly, again, it's a very subtle sweet smell. Like with the peach palette, I can smell peaches when I'm holding it to my face. With this one, I don't smell anything until I open up the packaging, and then I get kind of that sweet smell. So I really do think that this is a subtle fragrance as opposed to a lot of the other fragranced items that they've had in their collection. The magnet on this, I think I maybe got a dud. The magnet on mine could be better. I definitely think that this isn't a magnet that would hold strong if I was traveling with it and something bumped up against it. It would open, and therefore my shadows could be destroyed by whatever like bumps it open. I also have picked it up like this at one point in time, and the magnet didn't. I'm holding both sides right now, but the magnet, I think that you guys can see that it opens. It doesn't stay strong enough to hold it closed. So at one point in time I opened it, or I picked it up like that, it opened, and my nail dug straight into this shadow here, which kind of made me mad. I had to kind of repress it back in there. That could be a dud for my personal palette. I don't know if that is the same with every single palette. The mirror in here is really nice. It's a good full-size mirror. I like it for utilizing for anything that you need to utilize it for. It is the metal packaging, so it is going to stand up, not at a 90-degree angle, but it is going to stand up relatively well for you to be able to utilize it as like a vanity mirror or something like that if you are traveling with it. But I don't think that it's comfortable to hold it though like this to use as a vanity mirror, because it doesn't 100% fold in on itself because it's the metal packaging. I do think that the Too Faced metal packaging palettes are their best palettes. Honestly, when I think of some of their like iconic palettes, they're all in the metal packaging, not in the cardboard packaging that they've done before. Although I do have a cardboard packaging Too Faced palette that I absolutely love. Most of what I love from Too Faced does come in the metal packaging. This does have 18 shades of eyeshadow in it. There are 4 different finishes: mattes, satins, shimmers, and metallics. I would say that there are 2 finishes: mattes, shimmers. That is it. Mostly because the satins are too shimmery to work functionally as a matte, and the metallics aren't shimmery enough or aren't glittery enough, I guess, to be in your face metallic. That said, there is bigger and smaller particles in these shadows dependent on the finish. So I understand why they're coming to you with 4 different finishes, but ultimately this isn't a palette packed full of impactful shimmers. That is not what you're going to get from Too Faced, and if you think that that is what you're going to get from Too Faced, you would be sadly disappointed from any of their palettes, to be honest. So in this, you are getting 9 mattes. You're getting 2 satins, which are this one and this one, but I would also say that this one is a satin, even though it is labeled as a metallic on the Too Faced website. And you're getting 4 shimmers and 3 metallics. The metallics being this one, and this one. And then the shimmers being these ones. If you saw any of that. I would say, again, you're getting mattes and you're getting shimmers. You're not getting like super in your face. If you're looking for an impactful shimmer, that's not going to happen here. And I may be just speaking out of turn here because I am a person who has ventured into the crazy awesome indie space as of the last year. And now I look at these kind of shimmers and I'm like, meh, what the hell is that actually? The shimmer on my lid today is from the Lore palette, and Too Faced could never. Just saying. 2 of these shimmers are actually considered duochromes as well. No ma'am. The mattes are super buttery and smooth. They blend really, really well. They're not super powdery, so they're not going to fall out all over your face. They do get slightly powdery in the pan, so they're not like super firmly pressed, but they're also not firmly pressed, if that makes any sense. You're not going to like dig down to the bottom of the pan of eyeshadow because of how powdery they are. They don't fall out to speak of. at all. Like, I didn't really notice any fallout that I had to battle utilizing this palette, except for with a few of the shimmers, but that's normal for Too Faced. They feel really great in swatch, except for the reds. The reds do feel, the red mattes do feel a little bit more dry. I was actually kind of shocked to find out that they weren't like pigments. They weren't pressed pigments, that they were still considered eyeshadows, that they were, because they feel kind of drier, but I guess they don't feel grippy like a pressed pigment might feel in finger swatches, but they do feel a little bit more dry. I would say that said, this one is too dry. I felt like it got a little bit patchy and I wanted to love it so much more than I actually loved it, but thank God I had this palette with me because it came to the rescue a couple times when I was using this palette, which is not saying that it's a bad shade. It just doesn't blend as perfectly as I guess it could, considering that it's not a pressed pigment. This really does have great pigmentation for all of the eyeshadow shades in here. I mean, I don't really think that there's anything wrong with this palette from a matte perspective. I love that it has a really, really light matte and it also has a really, really deep matte. I love that it actually has those pops of like red and like cranberry, like mulberry color in here. Like I like this color story. I love from Too Faced. It's like unheard of color story from Too Faced. I really, really like it. It doesn't like really fall into the 50 Shades of Brown that we often see from Too Faced. The shimmers in here I spoke to a little bit ago, they're just kind of meh. They all have the same depth of impact regardless of shimmer formula. So I just don't think that there's any real difference between them. They are a little bit softer of a formula. They apply really, really well with a finger or a brush, but a wet brush is the best for these shimmers. And I think it's because it can melt all together and become one before you put them on the brush if you wet the brush. Whereas like these, I wouldn't say you need a wet brush to make that pigmentation show up on your lid. If you're not a finger applier, a wet brush will give you the same essence on your lid space with these shimmers as it does when you use your fingers to do it as far as opacity goes. I do think that there are several of these that lack a pigmented backing so that they show up more as toppers on your lid space than they do as shimmers on your lid space. This one and this one specifically are a little bit more of a toppery formula. This one does have a little bit more of a pigmented backing to it, but neither here nor there with those shades. Like I could take them or leave them. And the fallout with them is pretty minimal as well. I do think that you did get a little more fallout with these, but not a lot more fallout than you got with the mattes. I mean, it really wasn't much to speak of. I do think that this is best with or without a primer. I don't think that it did anything differently for the performance or the longevity. I think that those things are the same whether you are using this with or without a primer. The wear time is not great either way. You're only going to get about 6 hours of wear time before you see visible fading with this eyeshadow palette. And I had issues with wearing it for longer than that and coming in to like my hotel room and seeing like next to nothing left on my eyes at the end of the day and wondering what it looked like in the last store I was in. So that was kind of disappointing. This reminds me, however, of the old Too Faced formula that we all fell in love with through the like peach palette and the chocolate bar palette, and the shimmers remind me, the metallics specifically remind me a lot of the metallics that are in the chocolate gold palette as well. So I'm really happy to see that Too Faced is meandering back into that thought process when it comes to their formulations, because I really do think that that's when they were doing it well, honestly, and pleasing their customer base as well when they had that formulation going for them. However, I don't really think there's anything spectacular about this palette. And when I think about this palette costing $54, I mean, this is just a few dollars less than some of my more spendy palettes. And this is definitely not a formula that I think is worth a $54 price tag. I do think that this is a good $45 palette. I definitely don't think this is a good $54 palette. It's a palette that is kind of a meh palette for me. As a matter of fact, my boss and I were in a store together at one point. She was looking at the palette and she was like, should I buy this? I have 5 times points. And I'm like, don't buy that. If you want that palette, I have it. I'll give it to you. Like, I'm using it right now, but I will declutter it to you. Not a problem. And she's like, why? Don't you like it? And I'm like, I mean, yes, but also it's just one of those meh palettes. I do love the packaging for this. I love that it kind of mimics the front of the palette. And I do commend Too Faced for putting like the color story on the outside of their packaging with the shade names and all the things, because this is something that I don't feel like a lot of prestige brands do, but they would benefit from it. I really do enjoy their packaging. I'm keeping the packaging because this is a palette that I could easily see myself like giving up and not thinking any sort of way about it. So let's talk about the swatches. So first we have Sweet on You, which is a creamy cream tone matte. Then we have Sparkling Cider, which is a rosy champagne shimmer. Really beautiful shadow. This is probably my favorite of the shimmer, the lighter tone shimmers in this palette. Then we have Core Values, which is a muted corally rose shade, and this is a matte. We have APPLEY in Love, which is a ruby red metallic. This is a metallic that I would say is not a metallic. I think this is more of a satin formula. And you will see why, because the next one is labeled as a satin formula, and it is the shade Pick Me, which is a sea green satin. And I don't think that there's a whole lot of discrepancies. They look very similar in how they show up, and they perform very similarly. Then the last one in the first row is called Apple Sauced, and it is a red tone brown matte. The second row, the first shade is called Smitten. And Smitten is kind of more of a topper. This is one of the ones that I was talking about in the video that didn't have a whole lot of pigmentation or backing to it. This one worked really well as like an inner corner highlight or even a brow bone. But no matter how much you tried to pack it into an eye look, it really didn't show up any differently than this like glitter with no base. It is an icy, whitish, pinkish shimmer, depending on whatever colors you're putting it with. Next to that, we have Sweetie Pie, which is a pink shimmer, and it is really pretty. The next one is Bite Me. Bite Me is a warm, kind of petal pink, kind of like the corally pink above it in the palette, the one that is like the third shade in the swatches. Only this one is considered a satin, and it's kind of got a golden like flip to it, so it is a little bit shifty, but not like super shifty, not like duochrome, right? But maybe Too Faced version of duochrome. It is a satin finish in my humble opinion. Then we have Caramel Apple, which is a kind of a peachy matte. It doesn't really have a whole lot of like oomph to it as far as a brown or a peach goes, but it is definitely a combination of the two. So then we have Apple of My Eye, which is a golden metallic, again, more of a toppery shade. I don't feel like this has a whole lot of cards in the game. It is just a shadow that's a shadow to be in there. Then we have Candy Apple. Candy Apple is a cranberry matte. This one does feel a little bit more dry. Again, it is one of the red shades that I said I felt a little bit more dry, but this one definitely performs better than the other one. One of my favorite mattes to use in this palette, and I mean, just a really beautiful addition to the palette, to be honest. Then we have Crunch Time, which is an orangey coppery gold metallic. Truly a beautiful color. Does have a lot of opacity and backing to the shimmers, so I guess this one could be called a metallic, but I firmly believe it just falls into the same bunch as the rest of Too Faced shimmers, to be honest. And then we have Turnover, which is a mustard yellow matte. Really beautiful color. My other favorite one to use in this palette. So Snackable is a maroon matte. Kind of leans a little bit more plum. I do love this shadow, but I did not love working with this shadow. It was a little more fickle. It had a little bit more of a finesse that you had to use with it. It also feels a little bit more dry in the pan, and I felt like it lended to patchiness a lot more than any other shadow in this palette did. Still really beautiful. It got there. It just took forever. Slice Slice Baby is a green gold shimmer. This one is a little bit of a duochrome or flippiness to it as well. I don't think anything in here is truly duochromatic, but there is a little bit of shiftiness to this shade, as well as the Sweetie Pie and the Bite Me shades. And then we have Orchard Stroll, which is a caramel brown matte. And then we have Baskets Full, which is a deep espresso matte. Like I said, I don't feel like there's anything like spectacular about this eyeshadow palette. Yeah, I just don't feel like there's anything spectacular about the eyeshadow palette. It's a meh palette in my collection. I don't think that there's anything horrible about it, but I think it would land somewhere on the low end of like that medium ranking scale for me, just because it's just a palette, right? It's just another palette in my collection of palettes. Like, it doesn't stand out to me in any way, and I think that that is sad. Not good, bad, nor indifferent. The next palette we're here to talk about is the Lore palette. This is by Unearthly. This is a $32 eyeshadow palette with 0.61 ounces of product, or 0.067 ounces per pan. It is inspired by ancient, mythical, and mystical legends. You can see Medusa is on the front cover and is just gorgeous and spectacular, and you would think that the inside of the palette lended a little bit like greeny, right? This is a cardboard packaging. It has a magnetic closure on it. It does bend all the way back on itself, and it has a great mirror. The back of the palette does look like this, just has information about the palette, the pressed pigment shadow formula, and then the eyeshadow formula, and gives you a little bit more information about the palette. We're cruelty free, we're vegan, and we have a 24-month shelf life. When you open up the palette, these are the shadows, and each one of these pans is a magnetic pan. All of Unearthly's palettes are magnetic pans. And one thing that I love that they do, that I wish other companies would do, is on the back of the palette, it does have the name of the shadow on it. So if you pull all these out and put them into a magnetic palette because you're doing a build your own palette or whatnot, you're going to know which shade this is. Now, I myself would also probably write the name of the palette on the back of the pan, just so that I didn't have to go through my pans or my palettes and figure it out. But at least I know that that is how Unearthly marks their pans, and I would know what palette this goes into, just because I am the YouTuber that I am and I have it all in a spreadsheet. Let's be honest. There are 9 shades in here, 2 finishes, duochromes and mattes. They're making it really easy. This is a vegan formula, and it has 5 pressed pigments in it, which means 5 of these 9 shades, because it is a vegan formula, are not safe for eyes. And it is this whole top row here and these 2 shades here. So all 5 of these shadows are not good for eye use, and then all 4 of these are fine for eye use. Again, not great for eye use. It's just a United States FDA doesn't approve them for eye use because they're vegan and they use dyes issue. It is not in every other country issue. I do think I say this every single time I talk about not safe for eye use, but it is fair for me to mention it because I do know that there are some of you out there who, like, that is a deal breaker for you. So I want to make sure that you know that. That said, I did wear every single one of these different shades on my eyes and did not have any kind of irritation from them. I did have a slight bit of staining, especially from this shade here. But other than that, there was no irritation. This is what I am wearing on my eyes today. I have this black and this one blended out in the crease and otherwise. I have this one on my lid space and I have this one kind of marrying the two together. And that is what's on my eye. Look, on the underside, I do have this orange on my lower lash line as well, topped over the top of an orange eyeliner. So like this is the palette that is on my eyes today, and I really love that. I really love this palette. Like I've done so many eye looks out of this palette. This color story is just amazing. It speaks to me in so many different ways. On Thanksgiving, I wore an eye look that had this all over the lid, this packed into the crease, this blending everything out, and then this just kind of tapped over. No, this shade just kind of tapped over the top of this shade all over the lid. It was such a beautiful, almost all matte eye look. I love this palette. The one thing I think is silly is that this shadow here is a matte, but it does have some sparkle in it, which we all know I don't 100% care for in my matte shadows, but it didn't really impact in any way how this shadow performed. This also is a product of Unearthly revamping all of their eyeshadow palettes. They used to come in much bigger pans and now they're coming in smaller pans, but they've also reformulated some of their shimmer formulas from if you picked up this palette back in the day, it might behoove you to pick up a newer version of it because the shimmers, from what I've seen from the old palettes to these palettes, are a little bit more impactful. This is, like I said, a bestseller for Unearthly, and it's one of the first palettes that they came out with, and if I remember correctly. Let's talk about the shades here. The first shade is Serpent. Serpent is a duochrome pinky to greeny tealy color. Minotaur is a burgundy matte, one of my favorites. Then we have Sphinx, which is a duochrome corally pinky color to like a green blue kind of like, it's really hard to speak of. I think it's, I mean, on the website it says it's a duochrome coral to green. I do think that it has a bit of a green flip to it, but I think it's mostly like pink to blue. But then we have Fawn, which is this orangey yellow matte. This one is the one with the glitters, or in the formulation of it. Basilisk is a duochrome teal to emerald green. Then we have Centaur. Centaur is a pumpkin orange matte. We have Griffin, which is a deep coppery flip to pink duochrome. Then we have Cerberus, which is a deep black matte. And Medusa, finally, which is a yellow gold green. The mattes in this palette are beautiful. They're opaque. There's not really any fallout to speak of. They are really, I mean, I use this a lot. And they are really, really firmly pressed in there. You guys can see there's, I mean, it doesn't even look like I used this palette. I didn't see any powder in the pan, not really any fallout to speak of, and there was no irritation while using these shadows in an eye look. There was a slight bit of staining, like I said, coming from especially this burgundy shade, but nothing really horrible or anything that I couldn't cover up with an eye primer the next day. They all felt super buttery. Even the pressed pigments and even the one with the sequins in it, the sequin shade. The pigment was amazing. There was no fading and it does blend easily, which I also felt was different for many pressed pigments. A lot of pressed pigments you have to kind of finesse a very certain way. This one I didn't have any problems with. This black is what is blended into my crease, and I blended it out with this color and it just looks perfection. Like, I love my eye look today, and it was a total disaster when I first started it. And this is not utilizing any eye primer because this is the third time I put an eye look on my face, and the first two times I was trying to use this and didn't love the eye look that I came out with. And this is like the 4th video that I've recorded. I don't feel like my eyeshadow is lacking. I also don't feel like it's creasing at all. I mean, I could be wrong. Am I looking at that wrong? No, I don't feel like there's any creasing at all. I don't feel like primer is something that makes or breaks these eyeshadows. I love Unearthly. Like, I don't know why I waited so long to try them, to be honest. The mattes blend so pretty and beautifully that you could easily like gradiate your matte and make it look like more than one eyeshadow went into your look and only one eyeshadow went into your look, much like the black is in my eyeshadow. Now, that's not to say that this black is not potent, because as you saw in the swatches, the black is really potent black. It's just so easy to work with. A lot of people are afraid of blacks. I don't think that Unearthly would be a black eyeshadow that you would have to be afraid of. The shimmers are stunning. They're super stunning, super shifty, very impactful, in your face. A wet brush isn't going to make it any different than a dry brush or anything like that. Like, this is a dry brush application over an unprimed eye. They don't require a tacky base to be impactful, as you can see, and the fallout in application is easily swept away, and you don't really see a whole lot of fallout throughout the day with the shadows as well. However, I did notice less fallout throughout the day when I was wearing a glitter glue with the shadows. I do think that the shadows, the shimmer shadows, perform slightly better with a glitter base underneath them, because you're not going to see, you know, the fallout throughout the day that you see when there isn't an eyeshadow priming base. I do also think that they look better with a solid finger application. They're a little bit more pigmented, or not pigmented, but like opaque with a finger application. But I also think that they are just stunning with a brush. This is a brush, a dry brush application. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with how it is performing on my eye. I would say that these are best with a primer to mitigate any kind of staining, but as far as performance goes, it works well with or without an eyeshadow primer. As far as the mattes go, they work better with or without a primer. There's no fading, no voiding, and they build well. The shimmers are best with a glitter glue for impact. There's no creasing with or without a glue or primer underneath them, and they wore well. All of them wore well for at least 9 hours. I think I actually had my makeup on for about 12 hours, and I was wearing, it was Thanksgiving actually. I had my makeup on for 12 hours. I was wearing this palette only, and it looked, when I got home, as good as it, when I took my makeup off, it looked as good as it did when I put it on that day. So I think that I'm really super glad that I tried Unearthly this year. I know it was a brand that I had on my list for quite some time before actually pulling the trigger. But then when I did pull the trigger, I bought like 6 palettes. So I've got quite a bit to go through still, but I'm really super excited that I tried them this year, because I really love this palette. And if I remember correctly, I also love the last 2 that I used from them. The only qualm I had was the Not Normal palette had a difficult color story to work with, but as difficult as this color story looks, the thing about it is all of these duochromes are really have like kind of a greeny, peachy, like shiftiness to them. So they go with these mattes 100%. I didn't find the need to pull in any other eyeshadow when working with those shimmers in that palette. And even though it's 5 duochromes and 4 mattes, it's not quite the 50-50 or more matte split that I like out of a palette. I really didn't mind using that palette. I found it to be really easy to play with. And that said, I am going to go pull my next palette. I will be right back. So I just brought in a brand new eyeshadow palette brand to me, right? And that was Cosmic Beauty. And I wanted to make sure I got one of their palettes in for my ranking, for my end of year ranking. So I am bringing in the Winter Wonderland palette. It's not necessarily the palette that I feel like I wanted to use first, but it is the palette that spoke to me when I went to my drawer of shame. So I'm bringing in their Winter Wonderland palette to utilize over the next several weeks. I hope to have this palette roulette up by the end of December so that we just have an even, like, we don't have to roll this palette review into a different year and feel the confusion that I'm going to feel this year, because I think I have 3 palettes that I reviewed this year, but I started using the year prior. I don't know what happened just then, but this is what the palette looks like. And I'm really super excited to use it. When I think about pulling for my Build Your Own palette, like, this is the color story that I think will perfectly complement the colors that I think in my mind are good for winter. Now, I went between this one and the Cool Trolls palette were the 2 that I was thinking about pulling. But I definitely think that I can get this one done and completed by the end of December, whereas the other one I don't know that I would have been able to get done and completed by the end of December. So I can put a bunch of these into an eye look and feel fine. So this is the palette that we're choosing to go over in the next palette roulette. I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. Please let me know your thoughts and opinions on the palettes that I just got done reviewing, or let me know your thoughts and opinions on the palette that I will be reviewing. I would be interested to hear from you in the comments section, so don't forget to hit a girl up. Thank you guys so much for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed the video. I hope you and yours are well. I hope that you are all safe, healthy, and getting along as best that you can. I hope that you are all loving each other, being kind humans, living your best life, and until next time. Bye, friends.